मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अज़ीज़ व अहमद मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो, अली व फातिमा मग़मूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो, हसन हुसैन से मजलूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो, तमाम अइम्मे मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो, मुहिब चाहरदा मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। दुरूद पढ़ने से चेहरे पे नूर का हो ज़ुहूर, दुरूद पढ़ने से सब दिल की हो सियाही दूर, दुरूद पढ़ने से हर एक कल्ब हो पुरनूर ईमान, यही दुरूद है ज़ेबे तिलावते कुरान, इसी दुरूद से है ज़ीनते नमाज व अज़ान, इसी दुरूद का लाजिम वजीफ़ा है हर आन, मुहिब चाहरदा मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद। दुरूद पढ़ के पुकारा कलम में इरकाम, अमीन रोक लो अब तौसने जुबां की लगाम, रसूल फातिमा ज़हरा है और 12 इमाम, यही बुजुर्ग है सब लाए के दुरूद व सलाम, मुहिब चाहरदा मासूम पर दुरूद पढ़ो। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद वाले।
मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलवात।
Let's recite one Surah Fatiha to begin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat is condolences to the Imam of our time, Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So, before we even start the topic of tonight, one of the really cool things that's unique about this community is this short salam that's recited before the majlis begins. And I know some of you, and this is why I'm taking the time to explain it, especially as younger generations come, you don't understand the value of things like this. But this introduction that happens before the majlis is kind of like a preparation that one of the most important things that you take from this majlis is this salawat, is this reciting Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The significance of that and the importance of that, in a very practical sense, is that of all of the things that you can recite, the most valuable thing that you will find on the Day of Judgment is this salawat. And not just that it helps you in the hereafter, it helps you in this world. But let's talk about the hereafter first really quickly, right? So, on the Day of Judgment, after you go through all of the stages of the Day of Judgment, and there are 50 stages, and it can take you up to 1,000 years to pass each stage if you haven't done all of your amal. When you finish, then there's something called Tatawur al-Kutub. Tatawur al-Kutub means that all of your good deeds are written in one book, and all of your bad deeds in another, and then whichever one is heavier is the direction you go in. So for example, this book of deeds that's given, in some it's one book. And this book essentially, if it's given in your right hand, it means you're going to heaven. If it's given in your left hand, it means you're going to hell. Why? It means that if it's in your left hand, that means there are more sins in it than there are good deeds. And others say that no, if it's in your right hand, there's more good deeds, it weighs more, so therefore it's going to take you to heaven. Now this is the comparison of your deeds. And Allah is giving it to you in a book. What's interesting is, and what's complicated is that after this, there's something called the mizan, which is the scale. And sometimes people get confused. If Allah has already checked my good deeds and my bad, and He knows what's my good and my bad, then why do I need to go to a scale? But the scale actually measures something different. The book is telling you, did I do more good or did I do more bad? The scale that Allah puts you in front of is a scale of how did you use the bounties Allah gave you in this life. So Allah, for example, gives us the ability to breathe. He gives us the ability to think. He gives us family. He gives us food. He gives us air. He gives us animals. He gives us all these bounties and resources. And after He sees, did you do more good or bad? Now He says, I gave you all of these things. Did you do enough good to appreciate everything I gave you? So one side of the scale has all of the things that Allah gave you. He gave you the sun, He gave you the stars, He gave you the earth, He gave you food, gave you water, gave you parents, gave you facial hair for boys, not for girls. He gave you an education, He gave you all these wonderful things. He puts it on one side. On the other side, He says, here's what you did with what I gave you. Do you think we do enough good deeds to compensate for all of this good stuff that He gives us? No, we don't. In that moment, you're going to look at this situation, you're going to be like, Allah, you gave me so much more than what I did with. What do I do now? How do I get into heaven if my deeds are not heavy enough to beat out this scale? This is where the Ahlul Bayt explain, and they say that in this moment of difficulty, the one thing that's going to save you is the heaviest thing that goes on your scale of your a'mal, and it's the last thing that will go on your scale to make sure that your scale becomes heavy enough. And that is the salawat that you send upon us, the Ahlul Bayt. Which is why one of the descriptions of the salawat, to promote the salawat in the Arabic language, is khafifun ala al-lisan wa thaqilun ala al-mizan. That it's light on the tongue, it's easy to say, but it's very weighty on the scale. And that on that day, when you're weighing your good deeds against all the bounties Allah gave you, the thing that's going to bring your good deeds heavy is as much salawat as you recite. This salawat is so important that, for example, someone like Nabi Ibrahim is known as Khalilullah, the friend of Allah. Do you know in some of the narrations how he became the friend of Allah? He used to send salawat on the Prophet, and because of his frequency of sending salawat on the Prophet, Allah said, this is my friend. So this is the hereafter. In the dunya, this salawat and reciting it out loud is one of the very valuable things that we possess. Why? Because we have a promised hadith from our Prophet that he says, one who recites this salawat out loud, Allah removes nifaq from his heart. Nifaq is hypocrisy. Have you ever had it that, for example, you think about your religion, you think about all these wonderful things that you promised, you think about all these great things in religion, and you start to wonder, is that really true? Is that really possible? Those are the seeds of hypocrisy that grow in us because we live in an environment where people don't share our faith. They don't understand who we are. They don't believe the same things we do. So sometimes you begin to doubt, am I really doing something good? Does my religion actually mean anything? And the way that you correct that issue in your heart is when we recite salawat, Allah strengthens the heart to remove these doubts from our minds and give us confidence again upon the path that we're on. So which is why when we, for example, sit down to a majlis, and this is something really cool about this community, and I appreciate it, and I think it's one of the good qualities that is possessed here, and it's something as a tradition that don't lose this tradition, is that before you start a majlis, one of the things that you start with is that before we go anywhere else, we're here for the love of Ahlul Bayt, and one of the ways that we reflect and benefit from the Ahlul Bayt is this recitation of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That leads us into the conversation for tonight. And the reason I wanted to structure it this way is that many times there's things about faith that we talk about that we don't understand the reason why. Across this being our third night together, the intention of discussing tonight was the social or physical impacts of the presence of Bibi Fatima, of how her being there has changed our lives. The significance of this conversation being structured into three parts about talking about her impact on our aqaid, her impact on our spirituality, and her impact on our society and physical actions in life is because it's a reflection of what Islam demands from us. You see, Islam, to be a good Muslim, you have to have three things. And if you have these three things, you've accomplished and you've understood what faith wants from you. The first of these things is to have faith and believe in Allah. When we talk about usul ad-din, right? Tawheed, adl, nabuwwat, imamat, ma'ad, right? Qiyamat. These five is the philosophy of what I believe in my heart. And the first thing that Islam wants me to do is make sure that my belief in my heart is correct. That I understand who Allah is, I understand how to approach Allah, I understand there's a day of judgment, I understand there's heaven and hell, and I believe in all of these concepts. And Bibi Fatima is part of those concepts, which is why we said that understanding the history and the life of Bibi Fatima is something that's associated with your fundamental of faith. The second thing that Islam demands from us is a connection with Allah. That once I believe these things, how do I manifest in my relationship with Allah? And this is done through acts of worship and ibadat, the spiritual elements of faith, where we sit and we think about Allah, we pray to Allah, we do all of these ibadat. And that Bibi Fatima was someone who taught us about these spiritual elements of faith and taught us how to approach Allah and worship Allah. The third element that Islam demands from us is social relationships and society. Now there's three ways of explaining this. One, for example, we say that there's aqaid, philosophy, there's ahkam, haram, halal, wajib, and third is akhlaq. Ahkam we perform because we worship Allah, and we have to worship Allah is through the ahkam. When Allah says this is wajib, I do it. When Allah says this is haram, I don't do it. But akhlaq is the relationship I have with society. Meaning, how does society benefit from my Islam? Another way that this is described is by describing and saying that there's aqaid, and then huquq Allah, the rights of Allah upon me, and huquq al-nas, the rights of people upon me. You see, to practice a faith, it's not sufficient that I just worship Allah. To practice a faith, I also have to have society benefit from my faith. If there's no social element, if only, for example, my faith is talking about me and Allah, then why did Allah create humanity and societies? Allah says, when I make you and I give you religion, that religion has to be reflected both in the people, in your relationship with me and your worship, as well as in the people in society, that society improves and benefits from the fact that you are a Muslim. This concept was so fundamental to the religion of Islam that at the advent of the religion of Islam, there was a personality who was a companion of the Holy Prophet known as Uthman ibn Mad'un. Uthman ibn Mad'un is the Uthman that Imam Ali named his son after. Uthman loved the Holy Prophet. He's not the other Uthman. This is a different Uthman. This Uthman loved the Holy Prophet, and he says, I accepted the religion of Allah because I love this guy. And he's my friend, and I wanted to support him. He says, I didn't really understand the religion, but my friend was teaching it and he was leading it, so I followed him. He says, until one day when a particular verse was revealed, and that verse made me love this religion. And that verse comes and Allah says, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. He says, when I heard this verse, I loved Islam. This verse basically says that Allah in this religion commands you to do justice, to do goodness, to take care of your relatives, and to stay away from sin, to stay away from indecency, and to stay away from sedition causing corruption in the land. And this is the message of Islam. Uthman says, when I heard this, I realized that this wasn't just about making me better than everybody else around me. This was about changing the world. And that there's a religion out there that's concentrated on changing the entirety of the world and making the world a better place. That to be a Muslim, I have to be just, adl. And then not just, I have to do ihsan, goodness and kindness in society, and that's a part of my faith. And I have to take care of my family and relatives. And as part of this, I'm not allowed to commit sins that could be harmful to me and the people around me. I'm not allowed to commit indecency that could be disruptive and bad for the community as a whole. I'm not allowed to commit corruption. If Islam teaches this, then he says this is a religion that changes the world and I want to be a part of it. So which is why when we look at religion, don't imagine that just because I pray and I fast, I'm going to heaven. No. In addition to that prayer and that fast, I have to be a positive impact in society. I have to have a social impact in the world. I have to be a positive change. I can't be indifferent. Right? There's a joke I tell about this, and some of you will get it, and we'll know who's smart enough to get the joke. Our biggest problem is apathy, but who cares? Okay, I don't know if you got it or not. Apathy essentially means not paying attention to anything else or not caring about anything. So the joke is, right, apathy is our problem, but who cares? Meaning I have apathy as well too. Apathy is that concept that when I stand in a society, if you're committing a sin, what does it have to do with me? If you're doing something bad, why do I care? I'm not doing something bad. You're hurting that person, you're not hurting me. Why should I speak up? Islam doesn't want this from us. Islam wants us to be involved with standing up for justice, standing up for goodness, preventing evil when we see it, being fair and kind to people who are in need. An example of this, before we get to the aspect of Bibi Fatima, an example of this, for example, when Imam Ali was the Khalifa, he entered a township. And when he entered the township, he saw a blind man sitting on the street corner begging. And him being the Khalifa, everybody who's under the authority of the Khalifa should be receiving the benefits of the government. He says, hey, why is this blind man sitting here begging? Who is this blind man? And the people of the town turn to him and say, Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is a Christian man. Imam Ali says, so? What's his story? And they reply, well, you see, he was an ummal. He was a day laborer. So he would work for people, and when he would work, he would earn an income, and he would survive and eat. But as he got older, he lost his vision. When he lost his vision, his entire income had nothing to do with his brain. It only had to do with his ability to work. And if you can't see, you can't work. So he wound up a beggar. And that's why he's sitting here begging. Imam Ali became so upset. He says, you mean to tell me you people benefited from this man's energy, his power, his abilities for as long as he was able to, and now that he can't serve you anymore, he deserves to die hungry? He says, I mandate that it is the responsibility of the treasury to take care of this person as well as everybody else. The significance of that action shows that when we talk about the social impact we need to create, it's not just injustice. That's where ihsan and kindness comes in as our responsibility as well too. That our character and our behavior has to be positive to all people in need. The oppressed and the needy and the one in difficulty. And that's part of our faith. Now there's entire hierarchy, there's a discussion around this. But the significance of today's conversation is turning back to 5 lessons of how society is improved when we follow the character of Bibi Fatima. So we're going to mention 5 things, and I'm going to ask for you guys to give me at least 5 salawat. So we'll start with the first one with your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, the first of these, before we even get into the depth of it, is the idea of having a daughter. Now, sometimes in society, and this isn't something that happened now, but throughout the history of the world, daughters were considered bad and sons were considered good. Let me explain. They're not bad. Let me explain. It was seen that a son is someone who you can train and put to work, and he'll eventually take care of you when you get old. A son was seen as someone who could defend you and fight for you as he gets older and could protect you and be strong and do work for you. So it was like getting someone to help and support you. And a daughter was seen as a liability. Meaning what? That she wasn't strong enough, she couldn't go out and fight, she couldn't do some of these things that were in the men's realm. And therefore it would be a liability that even as she grows up, you have to take care of her as opposed to her taking care of you. Islam wanted to break this entire concept and say this is a foolish bit of nonsense. Which is why the best of humanity, which is our holy prophet, if Allah gives the best of humanity a child, He gives her a daughter. And that's a demonstration that if there is, for example, a child who is the best to possess, then why would Allah give anything less to the holy prophet and give someone else better than the holy prophet? The holy prophet is given the best of everything because he is the best of everything. That a daughter is considered to be the best of the children that you can have. Which is why we even take a look and see a statement from our sixth Imam where he explains and he says, daughters are a virtue or a rahmah from Allah, and sons are a bounty or a ni'mah from Allah. When you go in front of Allah on the Day of Judgment, ni'mah, bounties are things that Allah will ask you about. How did you spend them? Rahmah and mercies or virtues from Allah are gifts from Allah that have no compensation that have to be given. Showing that this is a great mercy from Allah, and that this concept that, for example, daughters are second-class citizens, Islam never believed that. And there are a variety of ways that we see this. One, that if it was, for example, anything less, why would Allah give it to His beloved Prophet? And two, why would, for example, then the fundamentals of Islam be built by women? Let me explain how this happens. One, we take a look and we see that the initial establishment of Islam is by the wealth of Bibi Khadija. If there was something wrong with the wealth of women, it would not have been built by the wealth of Bibi Khadija. The second thing, you guys have heard of Hadith Kisa, right? Everybody knows what it is. In Hadith Kisa, if you read it, there's a conversation where Allah says, when the five people, the Ahlul Bayt, gather under the cloak, Allah says, I created the heavens and the earth and the skies, and everything I created was out of love of these five. The angels ask the question to Allah, وَمَنْ تَحْتَ الْكِسَى? Who is it that is under this cloak? Allah introduces the Ahlul Bayt by saying, Hum Fatima wa abuha wa ba'luha wa banuha. Allah doesn't say anything useless. You agree? Allah says things very concisely, specifically, and in a perfect way. No one can say it better than Allah. When Allah wants to introduce the Ahlul Bayt to all of the inhabitants of heaven, He begins the introduction by saying they are Fatima, her father, her husband, and her sons. Why didn't Allah say they are the Prophet, his daughter, his son-in-law, and his grandsons? Why didn't He say they are Ali, his cousin, the Holy Prophet, his wife Bibi Fatima, and his sons Hassan and Hussain? Allah specifies and shows the importance of this role that is possessed by Bibi Fatima as something unique by saying that if you want to approach Ahlul Kisa, if you want to approach these Ahlul Bayt, the way to recognize them is through the personality of Fatima Zahra Salamullahi alayha. So this social construct of saying that one is better than the other is something completely invalid in Islam. To the extent where our Prophet would give an explanation that people, even in the time of the Prophet, would be sad when they had daughters. Remember, prior to the advent of Islam, the ignorant Arabs were such that if they had a daughter born to them, they would bury that child alive. So when the Prophet came and he prevented this practice, one of the ways that he prevented it was by showing that he himself possessed a daughter. And that two people who had daughters would be then chastised still because it was like, oh, that's a bad thing. So our Prophet comes to a man who has 3 daughters and he says, for raising your 3 daughters to follow the religion of Islam, I guarantee you that you will definitely go to heaven. So the man says, Ya Rasulullah, it's sufficient? 3 daughters, I go to heaven? He says, 3 daughters, you make them a Muslim, a mu'minah, someone who follows the religion of Islam, I guarantee you're going to heaven. So the guy who has 2 daughters comes running. He says, but I only have 2. Rasulullah says, even if you have 2, raise them to be good mu'minah, you'll definitely go to heaven. Then the guy with 1 daughter comes up, but Ya Rasulullah, I have 1. And Rasulullah again repeats, he says, even if 1 daughter you possess, if you raise her to be a believer, you'll definitely go to heaven. So meaning, don't look at the material consequence of what society teaches you, and society says this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good. Look at the reality of the affair of what Prophet is explaining to us and showing and saying that these daughters for you are the way into the entrance into heaven. That instead of, for some example, somebody being sad when a daughter is born to them, you should be excited and happy. I got my ticket to Jannah. I'm going to raise this child to love Ahlul Bayt, and when I do that, I will be someone who is entitled to heaven. So this social construct was something that Islam intended to break, and which is why Bibi Fatima is an example for society and fixing and changing society and improving society. That's why one of the most fundamental lessons that you learn from her about what our social responsibility is, and this isn't just for women, this is for all of us, is the importance of pursuing knowledge in your life. You see, the pursuit of knowledge is a responsibility on every believer. And the importance of that pursuit of knowledge, Bibi Fatima taught us in a conversation that happens between her and an old woman or a woman who comes to ask her questions. It happens one day, Bibi Fatima is at home and a woman comes, knocks on her door, and says, I have questions for you. And she comes in and she starts asking Bibi Fatima questions, and she says, some of these questions are mine. And some of these, there's a lady who doesn't have the proper hijab to be able to come see you, so she's given me her questions so I can ask you. And she starts asking questions and goes, question 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10. And she says, I'm embarrassed to ask you any more questions. I've asked you 10 questions already. Bibi Fatima replies and she says, ask me. I'm not worried about this. It doesn't bother me to answer your questions. She says, can you imagine that if you were hired to do a job for 1 day, and your job is to carry a weight up a ladder and place it up at the top of a building, but to do this job for 1 day, you're going to be paid $100,000, $200,000. You're going to be paid a mountain of gold. How would you feel while you're doing that job? Are you going to get tired? She says, no, I wouldn't get tired. I'd do it all day because of the amount of money I'm going to get is amazing. Nobody gives that kind of money for 1 day's work. Bibi Fatima says it's the same as us for assisting people and educating them. Allah has promised us a reward that if you filled all of the earth up to the heaven with as much gold and wealth as you could, it doesn't equal the reward that Allah will give us on the Day of Judgment for being the people who helped and assisted and taught the religion of Islam. She goes further to explain a variety of statuses of the scholars of Islam, and she says, on the Day of Judgment, the blood of the martyr, the shaheed, will be weighed against the ink of the scholar. And the ink of the scholar will be more weighty in the eyes of Allah and more worthy of reward than if you became a shaheed in the way of Islam. This promotion of this statement was about the idea of go and search and be educated about Islam. Whoever you are, wherever you are in your life, the most important and valuable thing that's going to assist you in your affairs is being educated about Islam, studying and learning Islam. Every single one of us, and us more than any other location. Why? Because we are the most educated Muslimin in this world right now. We have access to every resource. We can learn about anything. As a matter of fact, we don't even have to look it up anymore. You just ask ChatGPT, it'll look it up for you and give you the answer. But instead of asking ChatGPT, for example, to teach me about or to discuss Islam or find research and information to me about Islam, we ask questions like, how high can a cat jump? Why? We have to invest some time, and this is one of the lessons of Bibi Fatima, is that whatever you are in your life, be educated about Islam. Study and learn about Islam. It's the most important thing that you can achieve, and it will raise you to a status much higher than even if you were martyred in the way of Islam. What you can achieve by studying Islam is better than anything. Right? Each of us, to follow in this example of Bibi Fatima, is to spend some time of every day, or once a week, spend some time to study the religion of Islam. And that will be something that will benefit us on the Day of Judgment. And it's so easy now, whether it's watching a lecture on YouTube, whether it's reading something, whether it's asking ChatGPT questions to research and bring back. Now, don't believe everything ChatGPT tells you, But it's a starting point to start learning about how do I look for information. It's not a bad starting point. Use it. There's no shame in it. But then authenticate, research, find the sources, and go back and take a look at this information. The second of the social lessons from Bibi Fatima, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is where we start to talk about when we look at the lives of Ahlul Bayt, what they do is the best way to go to heaven. Let me explain what I mean by that. Every human being that's created on this earth, you're created with the intention that you deserve to and you should go to heaven. How do I get from this life into heaven? One of the things that Allah gave us is these prophets and these imams that look at their life and do what they do. And if you do what they do, you'll find an easy path to get into heaven. So which is why one of the important lessons from the life of Bibi Fatima is the importance of marriage. When we talk about marriage, and even the marriage of Bibi Fatima, and we take a look at our current society that says marriage is a bad thing. Society these days teaches you get married late. It's the end of your life when you get married. Islam teaches us something else, that no, get married quickly. It's valuable. It's a good thing to do. And that's why when we look at the life of Bibi Fatima, we see her marriage as something that was a priority in life, and she was married early. Now let me explain, and let's have a quick conversation about this. Are you guys okay? Nobody's falling asleep yet? All right, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You see, one of the interesting debated facts about the life of Bibi Fatima is how old was she when she died? And this is something that's debated amongst Muslimin. And there are 3 potential dates for her shahadat, at her age for her shahadat. We say she became shaheed at the age of 18. Some other people say she became shaheed at the age of 23. And other people still say she became shaheed at the age of 28. And what this goes back to is that when was she born? So the argument is either she was born 5 years before the Prophet announced his message, she was born at the time of the enunciation of the message of Islam, or she was born 5 years after the enunciation of the message of Islam. The significance of this debate actually has less to do with her age when she died and more to do with the fantastic story of her birth. You see, whenever Bibi Fatima would come into a room, or whenever she would approach the room, our Prophet would stand up from his place. He would greet Bibi Fatima and sit her in his own place. And when people complained and said, "Why are you doing this?" he would say that Fatima is born from the fruit of heaven. And whenever I miss heaven, I smell her and she comes to me and I remember the fragrance of heaven because she is made from the fruit of heaven. This shows the superiority of Bibi Fatima. Now those who were the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, they didn't like this. For her to be the fruit of heaven, it had to be that the Prophet announced his message, and after the enunciation of his message, then Bibi Fatima is born, and that's why he received fruit from heaven and Jibreel spoke to him and all these things happen. If Bibi Fatima is born before the advent of Islam, then all of this is a lie. And they can disregard Bibi Fatima entirely as having no significance. So what did they do? They came up and they said, no, this idea that Bibi Fatima was born after the advent of Islam is a lie. She was born 10 years or 5 years before the advent of Islam. And then they started seeing other benefits. That, if she's born before Islam, then at the time of her death, that will make her about 30 years. And for a 30-year-old woman to die when she's expecting a child is normal. Said, issue solved. And they threw away the issue. But this was all a concoction to remove the status and say that anything good you say about her is a false, is lie, because she wasn't even born at that time. She was born earlier and she was much older and had nothing to do with this. So all this was thrown aside when we looked at the actual narrations that describe her life, and we can take a look at events in her life that teach us and guarantee us that she was born 5 years after the event of Hijrah. How, for example, as a child, she was taking care of the Holy Prophet. How, for example, what age she was when she was married and what age she was when she was martyred, all became proofs for us to know that her real life was only of 18 years. Now understand something, if she's 18, and Imam Hassan is about the age of 6 or 7, That means she got married when she was about 10 or 11. Now, sometimes when people hear this, they say, no, that's not possible. That's crazy. For you and me, that's crazy. And the reason that we think it's crazy for anyone else is because we have an ethnocentric view of the world. An ethnocentric view of the world, what that means for our younger audience members, is that you look at what's right for you, and anybody who doesn't do that, you see them as wrong. So whatever, for example, however we live in America is what we see as right and good, and anyone who doesn't live according to how America lives, we see as bad. It's not good. A really simple example. The Eastern toilet. Do Americans like it? No. Anybody else who likes it? Bad. That's an ethnocentric view of the world. As a matter of fact, the Eastern toilet is much healthier for a person to use than a Western toilet. It's much more hygienic as well, too. But why? Because we don't like it. We consider it to be bad, and anyone who uses it to be less than us. And the same is true when we look back in history and we hear, for example, the idea that, oh, Bibi Fatima was only 10 or 11 at the age of marriage. That how could that be possible? That's a bad thing. Today in America, it's a bad thing. I agree. But what says that life in that time, in that place, this was inappropriate? For example, some of our grandparents, and maybe even our parents, were married at the age of 15, 16, 17. Today, I would say a 15, 16, 17-year-old to get married at that age is not good, because kids who are raised in America at 17, they're not ready to be married. I don't mean that as an insult to anyone. I just mean that our culture, the way we raise people, we don't expect them to be mature at that age. But 50 years ago, 100 years ago, our parents, our grandparents were expected to be mature by that age. And it was normal then for them to be married. So us looking at, for example, the birth and the marriage of Bibi Fatima at the age of 10, 11, or 12, and saying that, oh, how could that be possible? If you look at today's standard, yeah, it doesn't make sense. But that's an ethnocentric view of the world, that whatever's right for me is the best thing for everybody else. And if they don't do what I do, then they're bad. We don't believe in that. The significance of the message of her marriage is to say that when it became appropriate at a young age, not even the youngest age, but at an appropriate age, she got married. It was a priority for her. The reason it was a priority for her to get married, and the reason Islam promotes marriage, is that marriage is a secret tip of how to get into heaven. Our sixth Imam explains, he says, one who wants to see Allah without sin on the Day of Judgment should meet him married with a spouse. He also says, one who gets married protects half of his faith. We also see that our Prophet says that marriage is from my tradition, and one who stays away from my tradition is not from me. All of these statements are telling us and giving us instruction that marriage is one of those important things that we should have in our life, and it should be a priority. It should be something that we make as a focal point, that it should be something we move towards, and that's where our goal is, both for men and for women, that marriage is a priority, that once you fulfill the requirements, prioritize this and move forward, because it will help you achieve your goal in life, which is going to heaven. And for women, it's a great life hack. Men, it's a little bit harder. Let me explain. For a person who's married, for a woman who's married, on the Day of Judgment, you only have to answer about one relationship, and you get to go to heaven. Your relationship with your spouse. For a man, you have to answer about many relationships. You have to answer about your relationship with your spouse, with your children, with your parents, with your community, with your friends, with your brothers. All of these, Allah will ask you, did you manage all of these relationships correctly? But for a woman, one relationship. If you're married, and you go before Allah on the Day of Judgment, one relationship. How was your relationship with your spouse? If that relationship is good, heaven. And it goes even further. A woman dealing with her husband is the equivalent of doing jihad in the way of Islam. Imagine what that says about you. Imagine what that says about me. But meaning that Allah put this great thing in front of, for example, a woman, but it's a great test as well too, because when you get married, Allah gives the responsibilities and the authority to the man. That providing for the family, making decisions for the family, all go in the hands of the man because he provides those resources for the family to use. And a woman compromises her freedom when she joins Team Husband, and because of that, Allah says, then just deal with this one relationship and you get to go to heaven. The promotion of Bibi Fatima in promoting marriage and getting married at an early age is a demonstration that if there is a perfect woman or a perfect man, which is Imam Ali on this earth, present, then they move in the direction of marriage and move and believe that this is valuable. And that's something that we have forgotten as a society. Our cultural influence is pushing us away from this concept. But just as much as it's important to get married, Rasulullah didn't marry his daughter to just anybody. One of the attributes of finding a good spouse is what's called quf. Quf literally means one who is your equal. But this equal is not, for example, in looking at, for example, I'm a doctor, so my husband has to be a doctor. Or I'm, for example, an engineer, so my wife has to be an engineer. This quf that's being referred to in this concept is equal in the process of spirituality, of someone who has that understanding of how to worship Allah and is my partner in the worship of Allah. And that finding someone who is my equal in faith to promote this concept of going to it, because my goal is to go to heaven. So if my partner is not my equal in faith, are they going to help me go to heaven? No, they might drag me down. That finding that equal, and the proof of this is in the statement of, for example, when our Holy Prophet asks Imam Ali after his marriage, how did you find Fatima? How did you find your wife? And Imam Ali replies, he says, I did not find a better partner to worship Allah than Fatima. Is an explanation that that's the attribute by which we look at. Don't just get married for the sake of marriage. No, find the appropriate partnership. And which is why the concept of marriage being promoted in the examples of the Ahlul Bayt was always present. And it was something that was always promoted. And we can find many more examples of this, but this is one of the lessons of Bibi Fatima, that marriage is an important lesson. The next of our lessons, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Is the concept of hijab. Now let me explain something. Hijab is not a women's issue. It's a family issue. And I'll explain to you how. Every time you see the Prophet of Allah wanting to visit the house of Bibi Fatima, he stands outside of the door and calls 3 times, and if no answer comes, he leaves. If he calls outside of the door of Bibi Fatima, he says, can I enter? And she says, yes, you can enter. And then if he has someone with him, he says, oh Fatima, I have someone with me, can they enter with me? And then depending upon the reply, Rasulullah would bring this person in with them or not. The significance was that the Prophet was teaching the ahmiyat, the importance of that hijab, and the preservation of that hijab is not her problem, that I'm coming in, whoever comes with me, it's your problem, you deal with it. But rather that no, we preserve and protect the message of hijab. Further to that, you look and see the example when you look at the life and biography of the daughter of Bibi Fatima, Bibi Zainab, you see that when Bibi Zainab would want to go to visit the grave of the Holy Prophet, Imam Ali would send his sons to turn out the lights of the streets of Medina. Then he would walk in front of Bibi Zainab. Imam Hassan would be to one side, and Imam Hussain would be to the other side. And they would take her to see the Holy Prophet and bring her back. This was the significance of promoting the concept of hijab. Hijab isn't something that we say, oh, you deal with it, it's not my problem, I don't want to talk about it. No, you have to be the enforcement of the support, not the enforcement, the support that promotes hijab, is proud of hijab, protects hijab, serves hijab, to preserve this modesty in your house. This modesty becomes so important that when our Prophet asks a question of Bibi Fatima, what's the most important thing a woman can do in her life? Bibi Fatima replies, and this reply is very complex. She replies and she says that a woman is not seen by a non-mahram and that she does not see a non-mahram. And our Prophet becomes very happy and proud of this, and he's very proud of her for this answer of showing that this is one of the most significant things. The significance of her answer in promoting this concept of hijab is that she does not see a non-mahram and she is not seen by a non-mahram. Not seen by a non-mahram, we understand, hijab. Not seeing a non-mahram is the concept that hijab is not just about, for example, preventing the viewing or preventing other people from looking at you. But part of hijab is also not having that desire to be seen by others. Today, for example, when we look at the uses of social media and how social media has evolved and degraded simultaneously, we see it's the desire that people have to be seen. It's all about being seen. That desire is the ego inside wanting to be known, and hijab is that focus that this ego should not be given a priority and it should not be seen. That Islam wants you to preserve this and limit it to only the appropriate outlets, not to universal outlets. And that concept is not, for example, one gender's responsibility or the other, but rather that both together work together on this concept to promote it. And that same thing, it's not enough that, for example, I'm wearing clothing and therefore, for example, I can go out and do anything. No. Even the aspect of, for example, preserving ourselves, that if I don't need to go out and deal with this, it's better. This is why the conversation that happens when Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima get married, they go to the Holy Prophet and they ask a question: how should we split up the duties of the house? What's the responsibility of the husband and the wife? And this exchange is very interesting. They come to the Holy Prophet and they ask, how should we split our household chores and responsibility? And Rasulullah replies, he says, oh Ali, you handle the affairs outside of the house, and Fatima, you handle the affairs inside of the house. Look at the reply of Bibi Fatima. She says, Alhamdulillah. Thank you to Allah. This reaction is not because, for example, going out into the world was difficult for her or impossible for her or she couldn't do it. But what she says is, Alhamdulillah, why? Because Allah removed the liability and responsibility of serving the house and protecting the hijab an and ma simultaneously. That by being inside of the house, her hijab is preserved, and now her responsibility is focused on the family, and she doesn't have to protect her hijab and do all the things outside of the house. When our women are outside of the house, they have both of these responsibilities. They have whatever the obligation is to the family and to the house and the obligation to fulfill, as well as preserving their hijab. And Rasulullah made it easy for her in that process, and that shows the ahmiyat of hijab. And it has to be a social concept. This is why there are many instances of the preservation of hijab and the priority of hijab, not that the women asked for it, but that the men gave it the priority to build out and support that concept. When you see Imam Hussain in the field of Karbala call out, Ala hal min nasirin yansuruna? Is there no one to help us? Ala mughithin yughithuna? Is there no supporter that will support us? Ala hal min dhabin yudhibbu harami Rasulullah? This statement tells us what our Imam was asking for. Our Imam was not asking for soldiers when he asked, is there anyone to help us? He was not asking for warriors. He was asking for someone, a protector who would come and preserve the hijab and the dignity of the women of the family of the Prophet. Imam Hussain asking for this, he wasn't asking for people to come out with swords and spears. He wanted to ensure that his women are protected and that their hijab is preserved. This instruction is taught by the fundamental of Bibi Fatima. Our next and final point, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This one talks about the process of raising children. And we'll inshallah end on this point. Many times, and this is why, this is a social impact. Many times we take a look at that once a husband and wife have children, their priority is the children. And that's not what Bibi Fatima taught. And that's not a sign of a healthy relationship. You see, children are fruit. The tree that produces those fruit is marriage. If I want to have healthy fruit, I don't focus on the fruit. I don't nourish the fruit. I nourish the tree. And if I have a healthy tree, then I get good fruit. But if I ignore the tree and only focus on the fruit, even if it looks beautiful, it will turn out corrupt because the source of its nourishment is sick, is not taken care of. The way that we see this is that yes, Bibi Fatima was an excellent mother and did many things for her children. But one of the examples that cites and shows us this priority of how we need to live our life, you can't live your life after marriage just for your children. No, if you don't have a healthy relationship with your spouse, your children will suffer. The famous narration comes that at one point in time, in the difficulty period after the shahadat of the Prophet, Imam Ali comes home and he says, "Oh Fatima, is there anything to eat in the house?" And Bibi Fatima turns to Imam Ali and she says, "Oh Ali, there is not a grain to feed in this house." She says, "If I had any food for Hussain and Hussain, I would have preferred you to them and given it to you over them. But there is not even enough for them." This example is demonstrating and showing what's the typical reaction? That my children are the coolness of my eye, they're my priority. I will neglect you for my kids. But Bibi Fatima is teaching the opposite, that if I want to have good and healthy kids, if I don't preserve and protect this marriage and this relationship, then my children will not come out the way that they're supposed to. They won't learn how to have balance in their life. And that's where the process of, for example, this aspect of raising children, if you want to raise good children, that is preferring that relationship of marriage and prioritizing it. Of all of the difficulties we saw Sayyidah Fatima go through, and we mentioned her description that she says, so many difficulties were placed on me, such that if they were placed on days, those days would have turned into nights from these difficulties. It goes further that even in this situation, Bibi Fatima would weep, but when Imam Ali came home, she would smile. She would look at his need and support him through his difficulty and make that a priority to build that relationship and nurture that relationship. This doesn't mean neglect children, but no, that in a priority and a hierarchy of life, to have these good children, we have to preserve and protect this relationship of marriage. And even in this light, we see Bibi Fatima taking the priority to educate and teach her children. She was the first teacher of her children. As a matter of fact, the term ummi, which some Muslimin use to describe as ummi, is one who is unlettered. Ummi, one of the meanings of it, is one who was taught only by his mother. That even in that culture, the first teacher a person has in their life is their mother. And Bibi Fatima honored this because we see the description of the lessons as she would teach Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain, promote them to go out and to learn. That she used to make this process that whenever wahi would be revealed to the Holy Prophet, she would send Imam Hassan to the masjid to go listen to the wahi and come back and repeat it to her. Such that whenever Imam Ali would come home and he would have a discussion with Bibi Fatima and tell her that your father received a revelation and this was the verse, Bibi Fatima would know it before Imam Ali said it. And he would say, "How did you know?" And one day when Imam Ali comes home quickly, he hears Imam Hassan in the house repeating the verses of revelation to his mother. This story has very interesting pieces to it. One, the concept of teaching and educating and promoting the love of Quran and love of Islam in our children and talking to our children about Islam. And the other is look at the relationship and the conversation between Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima. Imam Ali, when he goes through something interesting, he comes on and discusses it with Bibi Fatima. He shares with her and they have conversations that are personal, not just about what did you cook today? Did you clean this today? How much stuff do we need to bring? But no, a conversation about personality, about experience. Many times our relationships devolve into very just functional, like business partners. Okay, did you do your responsibilities? I did mine. Did you pay this bill? I paid this one. Did you pick up the groceries? Did you get the cereal I like? And this is the only conversation we have with our spouse, like we're two business people working together. Imam Ali is showing the relationship, and Bibi Fatima is showing that relationship of interaction and socializing with each other and discussing affairs and interesting things, as well as educating their children about the priority of these responsibilities as well too. The love that Bibi Fatima had for her children is even reflected in the process that when she leaves her wasiyah, one of the statements that she says in her wasiyah, she says, "Oh Ali, be kind to my orphans." It's a heartbreaking statement. An orphan is one who loses their father in Islam, not their mother. But the relationship between Bibi Fatima and her children was such that she says, "Oh Ali, these are my orphans after me. And I ask you to be kind to them. And I ask you to take care of them." In a famous statement, she says, "This Hussain of mine is very sensitive. And after me, it will be very difficult for him. Make sure that you are extra careful with him because of this difficulty he will face after me." Maybe it was because of this that they say that after the shahadat of Bibi Fatima, when Imam Ali had completed her ghusl and her kafan, he invited the children to come bid farewell. And that he invited the children to come, and as they came, Sayyidah Zainab came, Kulthum came, Imam Hassan came. But the description says that Imam Hussain stood at the back of the room and would not come to the janazah of his mother. Sheikh Abbas Qumi gives a narration. He says, when this happened, Imam Ali says, "Oh my son Hussain, bid farewell to your mother. Remember the kindness and the gentleness that Bibi Fatima had prescribed for Hussain." They say that Imam Hussain, as a boy of maybe 5, turned his head and said, "Baba, I won't come. I know that when Maryam left this world and Isa called out to her, Maryam came and called to him even after her death that Isa come to me. And that did Isa go. I have never been to my mother except that she called me. I will not go to her now if she does not call me." The narration states that the kafan opened, the hands of Sayyidah Fatima were raised and said, "Oh my boy, come to me." And Imam Hussain ran to his mother and attached himself to the chest of his mother and wept. As the family stood and watched this, Jibreel called out, "Oh Ali, a majlis has started in the heavens. The angels cannot stand seeing the sorrow and grief of Hussain crying on the chest of his mother. Oh Ali, I warn you, remove this Hussain from the chest of his mother. If you don't, I worry that the heavens will collapse on this earth because of the grief of these malaika." Every scholar writes and says, "Oh Jibreel, why did the heavens not collapse then, when it was the same Hussain in the field of Karbala? And instead of his mother, there was an enemy sitting on his chest. Why then did the heavens not collapse?" They describe that Imam Ali parted Imam Hussain from his mother. The time for bidding farewell had been completed. There are 2 very lonely janazas in the history of Islam. 2 janazas that we don't understand how the burial took place. You see, for a burial to be done correctly, the marhum needs 2 people who are mahram. Marhuma needs 2 mahram. Because the process of lowering someone into the grave requires one person to pass the body down and one who is in the grave to receive the body and place it down. But there are 2 instances in history that we question, how did they manage to bury the person they were taking to the graveyard? One is Imam Zainul Abidin, when he had to bury his sister in Sham. That when it came time to bury Bibi Sakina, Imam Zainul Abidin was the only mahram, mature man who could bury his sister. And no one was there to help him. They wondered, how could it happen that one person alone, how would he take this body and put it into the grave, and how would he place it? To the extent where some of the poets and historians said, we imagine that at the time of Shahadat, the Ahlul Bayt come to each of us. That in that moment, looking at the difficulty of Imam Zainul Abidin, it must have been his father, Imam Hussain, who would call out, "Oh Sajjad, return my Sakina to me. Give her to me, and I will assist you in burying your sister." We would say that Imam Zainul Abidin in this moment, if he had to meet his father, Imam Hussain, at the burial of his sister, he would be embarrassed and call out, "Baba, forgive me. When you left my sister in my care, her clothes were not burned. Her cheeks did not bear the marks of the hands of Shimmer. Her ears had not been ripped and bloodied from them stealing the earrings from her ears." If you wonder how would Imam Zainul Abidin know to have this conversation and need this assistance, he learned it from the example of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib when he had to bury Fatima to Zahra. The other lonely man who was left alone was Imam Ali when he had to bury Bibi Fatima. That there was no second mahram to touch the body of Zahra. that he would stand by the grave that was made in the middle of the night alone and away from everyone. And imagine, how does he bury the daughter of Rasulullah alone? That who is there that can help her? That there is no mahram that is present, that is baligh to assist her. That we would imagine that it would be Rasulullah who would call out, "Oh Ali, return my amana to me." And it would be Imam Ali who would call out, "Ya Rasulullah, forgive me. It was not long ago you left her to me. But I swear her eye was not injured from the strikes in the streets of Medina. Her Mohsin was not killed at that time. Her ribs were not broken from being pressed behind the door. Ya Rasulullah, forgive me that I am returning to you your amana in this condition." The people had pressed her so much. You would imagine that Imam Ali, upon completing this burial, the wasiyah of Sayyidah Zahra was, "Oh Ali, the grave is a lonely place, do not leave me alone." That it's narrated that Imam Ali would sit by this grave in the middle of the night because it was not disclosed to anyone where Sayyidah Zahra was buried. That late into the middle of the night, Imam Ali would come and sit by this grave of Bibi Fatima and talk to her in his loneliness. Famously, it's said that one night after her burial, Imam Ali came and sat beside her in the middle of the night. And as he was sitting with her, a light sleep overcame him. And in his sleep, he says, "I saw Zahra," who said, "Oh Ali, rise and return home. My orphans are looking for me." Imam Ali wakes up from this sleep and immediately hurries back to the house. The narrators say that Imam Ali, when he returns home, he finds on the musalla of Sayyidah Zahra, a small girl sits there crying. Imam Ali says, "Oh Zainab, why are you crying?" She says, "Baba, I miss my mother. Where has she gone?" This daughter's connection to Bibi Fatima is not something that was easily taken. Rather, we say that Bibi Fatima's connection to all of her orphans was very difficult, which is why when Imam Hussain leaves the city of Medina, there are two graves he goes to visit. One, they describe, he goes to the grave of Rasulullah, and he walks bravely and firmly to the grave of his grandfather to bid him farewell. The second grave, they describe that we did not see where Hussein went, but we saw him go as a child goes complaining to his mother. They describe in the event of Karbala, on the night of Ashura, that there was a crying heard from the field of Karbala. When Nafi ibn Hilal, the security guard of Imam Hussain on that night, asks, "What is this crying?" Imam Hussain says, "Ignore it." Nafi says, "It makes my heart uneasy. Yamna Rasulullah, who is this that is crying? Why can't we assist them?" He says, "Oh Nafi, this is my mother Zahra, who sits on the place of my shahadat and weeps for me. As I today am preparing for all of my brothers and children to be shaheed, she prepares for me." This Sayyidah Zahra was the one who was connected in the shahadat throughout and was there to support where she could. But the most heartbreaking moment comes, they describe, when Sayyidah Zainab returns to the city of Medina. The same way her brother bid farewell to two graves, Sayyidah Zainab came to greet two graves. One, she went to the grave of Rasulullah as an emissary does. "Ya Rasulullah, you sent us on a mission. I have returned from my mission. I have completed the task you gave me and my brother Hussein. Here is the result of our attack and here is the result of our efforts." The second grave, she goes to the grave of her mother Zahra and sits there and describes, "Oh mother, I remembered you in so much difficulty. I went through so many challenges without you." There is a description that says, in this moment, she says, "Oh mother, there was that shirt that you gave as an amana to my brother Hussein. They tore it from his body when they killed him. But I have brought it back to you." The narrator and the poet say that Sayyidah Zainab, she takes the shirt of Imam Hussein, places it on the grave of her mother. They say that the ground began to quake from this shirt being on the grave of Sayyidah Zahra. The poet narrates, they say Zainab would say, "Oh mother, you have only seen the shirt that bears the mark of Hussein's blood. I am the one who saw the chest of Hussein. I am the one who saw the trampled body of my brother. I am the one who kissed the cut throat of Hussein ibn Ali. I am the one who cradled my brother's head." وَلَا لَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. يا الله بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها وسر المستودع فيها. Oh Allah, by the rights of Bibi Fatima, her father, her husband, her children, and the secrets of Sayyidah Zahra, oh Allah, accept this small majlis from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumin and all those who are in need of dua. Oh Allah, we have gathered here with hajat by the right of the mention of Sayyidah Zahra and her children. Fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, those amongst our families, our communities, the mu'mineen who are suffering through difficulty and sickness and disease, Ya Allah, give shafa'at to the mu'mineen wherever they are. Ya Allah, there are those who are suffering through strife and insecurity and difficulties in this world. Give aman to the mu'mineen, muslimeen, wherever they are. Oh Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahibul Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahibul Zaman. Oh Allah, entitle us to the shafa of Imam Hussain in this world and the hereafter. One Surah Fatiha with your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli